Hey everyone, when you think of the Bible, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably a single, massive, leather bound book, right? Well, what if I told you that whole image is, well, kind of wrong? Today, we're going to demystify one of the most influential texts in all of human history. And I promise you're going to be surprised by what we find inside. So let's just start with the biggest question right off the bat. What is the Bible? It seems like a simple question, but the answer is way more complex than you'd think. And it all starts with one single crucial fact. The Bible is not one single book. Seriously, it wasn't written all at once by one person in one language. And that is probably the single biggest misconception out there. To really, truly understand it, you have to picture it as something else entirely. That's right, it's a library. A whole collection of different scrolls, ancient letters, beautiful poetry, and detailed historical accounts, all written by tons of different authors in different languages spanning centuries and centuries of time. Once you start thinking of it as a library instead of a book, everything else just clicks into place. Okay, so let's walk into this library. Like any good library, it's organized into sections. And for the Bible, the most fundamental division is between what we call the two testaments. Now, that word testament is actually a huge clue. It comes from the Hebrew word brit, which means a covenant, basically a sacred promise or a deep binding agreement. So this entire library is actually structured around two major covenants between God and humanity. So on one side, you have the Old Testament. This section contains the sacred texts of Judaism, what's known as the Tanakh. This is the story of that first covenant. Then you have the New Testament, which is uniquely Christian. It's a collection of 27 books all about a new covenant. But, and this is a big but, this is where things get a little tricky, because not everyone agrees on which books actually belong in that first section. And that's the thing, not every edition of this library has the exact same table of contents. Deciding which books were in and which were out was a long, often debated process that took centuries. This official list is called the Biblical Canon. You can think of it as the librarian's final call on which books get to go on the main authoritative shelf. And as it turns out, different religious traditions ended up with slightly different lists. So let's start with the foundation itself, the Jewish canon, also known as the Tanakh. It's made up of 39 books organized into three main sections: the Torah, or the Law, the Nevi'im, the Prophets, and the Ketuvim, which are the writings. This collection is the bedrock for what Christians call the Old Testament. And right here is where we see a major fork in the road. For Protestants, their Old Testament lines up perfectly with those 39 books of the Hebrew Tanakh. But for Catholic and Orthodox Christians, that part of the library has quite a few more volumes on the shelf. This chart just lays it all out perfectly. You can see that while all Christian traditions agree on the 27 books of the New Testament, the Old Testament is where they differ. Catholics have 46 books, and Orthodox traditions have even more. So why? Well, it's because they draw from a very important ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures called the Septuagint. This version included additional texts that weren't in the final Hebrew canon, and those are the extra books you see. Some people call them the Apocrypha, but in Catholic and Orthodox traditions, they're known as the deuterocanonical books, which literally means the second canon. So, this complex library has gone on an incredible journey through countless translations. Let's zoom in on one really fascinating story: how these texts made their way into the Russian language. We're talking about a journey that took over 1,000 years. It all started way back in the 9th century with the very first translations into a language called Church Slavonic. But a complete printed version, that didn't show up until 1581. And even then, after more revisions, it wasn't until 1876 that the entire library was finally available for people to read in modern Russian. It's just an incredible, centuries-long effort. So look, no matter which version we're talking about, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, the influence of this library is, well, it's almost impossible to overstate. The numbers alone are absolutely mind-blowing. Get this, over 6 billion copies have been printed. Let that sink in for a second. That makes it, by far, the most printed and most sold book in all of human history. Nothing else even comes close. And its reach is just as staggering. It's been translated into nearly 3,000 different languages. That means over 90% of the entire world's population can read at least some part of it in their own native tongue. That's just wow.
So, in the end, the Bible isn't just one book. It's a vast, ancient library with different editions, different shelves, and different tables of contents. It has undeniably shaped cultures, nations, and individual lives on a global scale. But as we've seen, the simple question of which books belong in that library, well, that's been debated for centuries. And it's a powerful reminder that even our most foundational texts have their own complex, fascinating, and very human story.